My name's Dylan Wellbaum, and I'm here to basically talk about the idea of voluntary euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. Now imagine if I told you that you only had 6 months left to live, or that you were diagnosed with some sort of terminal illness that there was almost no chance of fighting or getting away from, and even if you did, there is a large chance of it coming back and you'd have to fight with it the rest of your life. Would you then be able to, or would you want to, continue fighting on with this illness? About 9 states have passed laws that allow a patient to go on and go out in their own terms. Basically, they're called Death with Dignity Acts, which basically then allow a doctor or a physician to grant the patient's request to end on their own terms. In some cases, this is the doctor giving them a time span or giving them medicine to do it themselves, or the doctors will euthanize the patient with medicine on their terms. Basically, the medical aid and dying laws allow terminal patients with less than 6 months to request a prescription. And basically with this, it gives them a time span to make sure that they're absolutely sure that this is what they want to do. There are some rules in place for this. So 2 physicians must confirm that yes, this patient has this illness and that this patient does require or that they fall under the certain idea that they only have a certain amount of time to live. And the patient must also be put through medical and mental examination to make sure that they are medically fit and understand what decision they are making. It is required by law that alternatives must be discussed also, so that the patient is best informed and they know all their options, basically. The request must be given orally and written and can be taken back at any time, of course. Basically, throughout my speech, I'm going to start by going through and giving you reasons why people support this law and they support it being passed on a federal level. And then I'm going to go into other moral issues of why people don't necessarily agree with this and they don't think it should be passed. Starting off with why people believe it should be passed, we have right to die laws. And basically, that's the idea that people believe that everybody has the individual right to live or die on their own terms. In a 2015 Time magazine article titled "The Last Choice" by Josh Sandberg basically gives the account of this young man named Daniel Swingard who fought through liver cancer, and he's currently living without it and it's in a recession, but he has that constant fear that it will come back or possibly come back later in the future. He's given a quote saying that Swingard said, "I don't want to die in a hospital or in a morphine fog. I've seen it happen before. I want to die somewhere familiar and have the people around me that I love." Basically, the big argument for this side is that everybody has the right to go out on their own terms, and they have the right to live, and they have the right to die in whatever way they see fit. Kind of basically to the idea of the pursuit of happiness. Everybody has the basic individual right to live the way they want to live. But in situations like this where they don't have the ability to control their environment, they're basically having their freedom taken away by the illness. So giving them the freedom to take their own life and go out on their own terms gives them a certain form of dignity that, while hard to understand, it's hard to understand unless you've actually been in that situation. Now going on to those that argue maybe against it or they don't believe it is a good idea. One major issue is that people believe that allowing people to end their lives devalues human life on its own. Basically the idea that because, I'm going through this, or I'm ill, I'm terminal, a lot of people believe that life is a God-given thing, and a lot of people maybe they're not as religious, but from a religious side of view, a lot of people believe that life is God-given, and by ending it early, you're basically throwing away that gift that God's given you. And other points that, while it doesn't seem like it's a very individual choice, and it doesn't seem like it would affect other people, in terms of everyone that's around you, the more and more this happens, it seems like it defaces the value of life. And because you're no longer in another person's life, their life is now less valuable because a very important part of their life is now gone. comes from the idea that if we legalize this area, potentially we'll fall down a slippery slope of legalizing other forms of euthanasia. And basically to where instead of the patient deciding I want to die here or this is the way I want to go, the medical practitioners are now saying, oh, this person's unable to live or unfit to live, and now they are euthanizing the patient without the patient's consent. Now this seems like a scary ideology, but in other places this has actually happened. In a 2016 article from Linacree Quarterly by Dr. Solmesy, the legalization could lead to just total euthanization on its own. In 1980, the Dutch government legalized physician-assisted suicide and allowed people to take their own lives on their own and allowed doctors to help with this. By 1990, 50% of these euthanizations weren't voluntary and they were by the doctor's hands. Continuing on, they eventually legalized the euthanization of 12 and under, so basically children who were terminally ill, and then their parents were deciding whether they wanted them to go on suffering. By 2004, 21% of these infants were euthanized without consent of the parent or the child themselves. And basically, this is a slippery slope we've been talking about, to where the area that we're giving people individual freedom, and for a small amount of time we're increasing individual freedom. At the same time, we're opening up the idea that these higher up governments or these potentially like medical providers can now take away the freedom of life. And they are basically giving the doctors and the medical practitioners the idea that, and the power to choose who deserves to live and who deserves to die. Basically going into it, not kind of run out of time in this area, but to kind of wrap it up, basically I'm just going to talk about one more final point. And the point is that if this idea is open or the option is given, patients may not trust their doctors, and they might not trust the motives behind the options. So if you're in a position to where this doctor says, you can do this for treatment, you can do this for treatment, and now you can also euthanize yourself. A lot of times that becomes a stressful situation for the patient. And in a 2019 study from the Economic Inquiry by Professor Rodrigo Harrison and Francisco Silva, in situations where both the patient and their family members are given the same amount of information, the patient may often go with the decision that they think their family wants, or basically what their doctor is giving them. So instead of using their own consent or choosing the decision on their own, they're basically doing what they think other people want for them. So by opening up this decision, a lot of times you'll lead to people committing suicide, or they'll go with the option because they think it'll be less of a burden on their family. To kind of wrap this up, I've kind of talked about the ideas of individual freedom and whether should these people be allowed to take their own life and go out on their own terms, or in the end, does it come up to devaluing human life? And at what point is it okay to say, this life is no longer worth living? In points of discussion questions, I have one question for you guys. Well, I have 3 questions. But my first discussion question is there a moral difference between passive euthanasia, which is like pulling the plug and just letting the sickly person die, or active euthanasia, which is actively assisting in the suicide or giving them medication to end it?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, yeah. Is there a moral difference between passive and active euthanasia? Which passive is just pulling the plug and letting them die, or active is actually giving them the medication to end themselves, basically.
From what it sounds like, so we're asking about like what's morally right here. And from how I see it, I think it's up to the person, not up to the doctors themselves. But I don't think there is a difference between the two. If the person would like to cease in existing, then they can do that on however terms they see fit, whether it be pulling the plug or the pills or needle or whatever.
Yeah. In a lot of terms in passive euthanasia, it's often
the patient can't respond or they're too sick to choose. So a lot of times the family members or the guardians of the people will then give the decision. So to where active euthanasia is more for people who are terminally ill, but they can choose for their own, if they're not quite sickly enough to where it's their decision. If there's no other points with that, I'll move on to my second question. If this is legalized and passive or voluntary euthanasia is legalized, would financial motivations encourage insurance companies and healthcare providers to promote this instead of other, treatments, basically?
I think as with other decisions you make in life, you go to an expert, looking for the financial advice, if you choose this insurance plan, it'll be cheaper for you and you'll still get these options. But it's just very hard to think about in the future if we legalize it, there's going to be people who can expertly say it will be cheaper for you and your family if you go ahead and end your life. That's just wacky.
Right. Which there's a lot of what ifs in every situation,
Right.
but that's a good point. There's no add-ons to that situation. For the third area, I said, should patients be forced to take the medication themselves, or should physicians be forced to give patients the medicine that ends their life? So if it is legalized, voluntary euthanasia is legalized, should we force the patients to do it themselves or allow medical practitioners to do it? Yeah.
In the theory of that case, I would say that the patient should be able to decide which thing that they'd like to do.
Yeah.
Will they take them at home, or will they take them in the hospital? Because if they bring the medications home, then that can lead to other people getting their hands on them, and that can start another. That can be another drug in the marketplace. That'd be
Yeah.
very popular.
Yeah, that's a good point. So a lot of cases where, especially where instead of physician-assisted suicide, where it's injected by the medical practitioner, in terms of death by dignity laws or death with dignity laws, they allow prescription where there is a pill that is given and then they can take it at the hospital or with loved ones. So basically back to the one example that I gave where the interviewee was given the option, or they were saying that they'd rather die surrounded by loved ones instead of in a hospital. So the one alternative is giving the patients the idea or the ability to do it themselves at home.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, any other questions or points? Awesome.